Hello, everybody, and welcome to Games About Games for Gamers Who Game, a LudoNarraCon 2025 panel discussion about games that are themselves about games, incorporating the developers, the players, real or fake video game history, and even games inside of other games. I am your panel moderator, Lucas Immanuel, the director of the remake of the end of the greatest RPG of all time, a deduction puzzle game set in the last hour of a lost, non-existent 90s JRPG. I am joined today by two amazing panelists who I would love to have introduce themselves and their games, starting from the left with you, Adam.
Hi, my name is Adam Pype. I am one third of Beeswax Games is our company, and we make horror games. We're working on a game called No Players Online, which is a game about being alone in an abandoned multiplayer server, and then a whole bunch of other stuff. But that's the main premise. Yeah.
My name is CobySoft Joe, but either Kobe or Joe is fine for the panel. I'm working on a visual novel set in a monster collecting RPG called King Cabbage. Has a crazy 3D aesthetic, and I'm making it mostly on my own with a little bit of assistance from Holly, who's doing programming assistance for things I am too dumb to figure out, and Addie, who's doing the porting. So, yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Well, yeah, no, genuinely thanks to both of you. Applying for this panel was simply an excuse to get to ask you two questions and spend some time, so I'm very excited that we're going to get to do this. I want to be clear right off the bat that though we have three of the wildest game pitches I've ever heard, this is not only about these three games today. This is about generally games about games. You can feel free to comment on each other's games, on games that are outside of this. And to that end, it probably is going to be helpful to really quickly define what we mean by games about games. The definition the three of us came to was a game that replicates, represents, or references games as the medium of games within its like presentational structure. So the example that's easiest to illustrate this would be if you have a red hat wearing plumber in your game. That's a reference to a game as media. But if you have a game where you need to build levels for a red hat wearing plumber and then ship it to players, then that's a game about games because it represents games as media. Some examples of games that fit within this category are last year's UFO 50, which has fake video game history, the making of Karateka, real video game history, the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe, the Beginner's Guide, and even as far back as things like Moon. My first question for all of you today is, while these things have existed for a ton of video game history, all three of these games are happening at the same time right now. So why is it now the time that these games about games are coming to the forefront? What do you think it is about the year of our Lord 2025?
That's a good question. I think it's honestly kind of I feel like it's just like the medium is like maturing a little bit. It's like like how so many films are about film directors and so many books are about writers or something. I think it just makes sense that once we pass a point of like, oh, like the game is a game and stuff like that, but at a certain point it's like, okay, it's like a maturing medium. We can start to express ourselves, and then it makes sense that we express ourselves through the fact that we are game developers and that we think of games as something that we're working on and stuff. And so I think it's natural that as we get a bit more like metaphysical with the medium, then this kind of stuff starts springing up. Why exactly in 2025 though? I'm not sure, but I think we're just like, I think there's been a lot of games already that do this stuff. I think now it's just like we're at a point where a lot of the really big ones, like Undertale and stuff like that, have a super like big mainstream stuff. So like it's like almost mainstream at this point for a game to have something metaphysical, to have something fourth wall breaking. So like the audience is like super primed for it at this point, and it's like popular, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I my best friend Leo, who's a YouTuber, I asked him, I was like, is this like cliche for my game to have like fourth wall breaking stuff? And he's like, well, I mean, most stories before now were not that, so you're fine, basically. But it is interesting. I think Adam is totally right about the medium maturing, so that's why it's happening. Because I mean, just last night I picked up a random manga by Ishinomori, who made Cyborg 009, and it was like very, very self-referential about a manga artist, really trippy and psychedelic, and I just thought it was interesting. Like, yeah, comics were doing this super long ago. That was probably from like the 70s or 80s, and yeah, there's books about books, movies about movies all the time. I think that you said, Lucas, like half the movies are about like making movies, essentially, or like a thinly veiled metaphor about making movies. So I guess video games are just slowly catching up to the standard in a way. But because it's an interactive medium, it like feels a little different, because you can't have a movie like stop and crash your DVD player or whatever, Blu-ray player, whatever we're watching right now.
Free idea for any film director out there.
Yeah, I mean, Megalopolis, he was talking about doing some fourth wall breaking stuff. Coppola was talking about having like an usher come in and like talk to the screen. So it's like, I mean, the opportunity's there for other mediums to still do stuff like this.
Kobe, if you don't think I set out to find those specific IMAX screenings that would have the usher come out and do it for Megalopolis.
I think it's actually a good point, because I think games are like super primed for this kind of fourth wall breaking stuff, because it's typically played in a private fashion and in an interactive fashion. So you can do stuff on your desktop because it's gonna get played on a desktop anyway. So it's much more actually practical to do like cool fourth wall breaking stuff with a game than say a movie where half of it will be in theaters, or like a book where it's like, oh, the print you're getting might be different or something. But like a game, pretty much everyone is playing it in the exact same setting somewhat, except when you port to consoles, which I think for our games is pretty difficult. Yeah.
I'm gonna carefully not talk about that one, but I think that's really interesting. The idea of like the fourth wall, right, comes from the concept of you have the three walls of the sitcom set, and then you have the fourth wall where you're looking towards the audience. But games kind of exist in a weirdly different... I mean, some of them are very theatrical, but they exist in this really different space where it's not just about the actors that are on screen. You have things like user interface. You have things like elements that you understand about how you're opening the game in the first place. That seems like it'd be very difficult, like you said, to crash a movie halfway through for a cinematic effect. I'm wondering... there's something that I think all three of the games that we have here on this panel do, which is kind of that messing with the user interface and making it part of the story. The kind of game elements that aren't just the content of the media, but also like the form of the medium. And they are putting those elements into the game in a way that is very interestingly related to the games about games. Adam, I think about your game with the UI that is there for the abandoned multiplayer shooter that in the game itself doesn't really serve a purpose, but instead kind of elicits the feeling, oh, this was this old shooter that I'm now playing through in this different context. That's a little bit spookier than probably originally intended. And I'm wondering how all of you have gone around designing these kind of things and working with these UI elements that might not serve a purpose in where they are now, but kind of tell this story of the game within a game in a different way.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, like, for my game, it's so cool because it's like, like all of it is the game and stuff, because like the narrative is that the person that's interacting with the computer is like a protagonist in the game, and so you're like everything you like directly inhabit the view of what the person in the story is seeing, like 100% with no outside UI, and therefore everything, even though it is like a desktop and like a very UI based thing, everything that exists within that is 100% part of the story. It's like 100% like I explain it like if my game was like adapted into a book or something, it would say like, oh, and the player presses the button or something. Like that's part of the story. And I think it's actually cool because it's fun like playing with like the inconsistency as well, because I like purposefully do a lot of like time inconsistencies with my game. It's like a 3D game in the 90s, but then like then it's like this still being VHS used or something, and it's kind of like super weird, like a lot of stuff doesn't like line up or something. And so it's actually really fun to like kind of put random like desktop elements that are kind of out of place, and then it's like it's not a mistake, this is just like part of this weird alternate timeline or something. Oh. Yeah, and also how like because the game has a lot of games made by amateur developers in the story, all of those games might be like really, like if they're badly made or something, like if I don't spend all of the effort into like polishing it up or something, that's actually totally fine. Like anything goes because it fits with the story. It's like the games you're playing, it's not made by me, the developer of No Players Online, it's made by the developers within No Players Online. And so like kind of anything goes in that sense, and becomes a part of the story. Even all of the mistakes are a part of the story, to the point that I even make it so like it's on purpose that it's super easy to no clip out of the level, or like there's a bunch of like barriers that are super easy to get over, or it's like you can kind of do this thing that if the wall is a little bit slanted, you can just like jump on top, like slide on top of it, which is kind of typical of this kind of 90s era movement systems where there's like a mistake. If you think of like buddy hopping or something in Half-Life or something, that just like instead of fixing that, just like embracing it. It's like, oh yeah, of course it's a 90s shooter, of course like there's so many exploits in the movement system. That's like I just like embrace all of these mistakes that I make basically.
It feels
Yeah.
like go for it.
Oh no, you can go ahead.
It feels like you're very in line with, it's not a game about games, but the kind of like lineage from Sam Barlow's Her Story, where you have this interface that you're interacting with directly, and you even have a character that's canonically part of the narrative that is the one who is interfacing with the UI. I think that's really interesting, where you say like, if you were writing this in a book, it would still be describing the user interface rather than the user interface being the gamic representation of what you are doing in the game.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, to jump off of one thing you were saying about the games within your game being by amateur developers, and how you can like have mistakes with that, or make them even like a little bit bad, and it works effectively. I think that works really well in UFO 50 actually. You know, coincidentally they released games in like a 5-year span within the game and outside of the game. I don't know how intentional they were with that. That might have just been a coincidence. But the early games being more primitive, and it telling this meta story about a developer maturing over time, is like really interesting. Another point, jumping off what you said, Adam, was like talking about easily no clipping out of 3D spaces, and like that is one of the things that games within games and games about games like need to talk about, because that's such an important part of the medium. You know, you can't go out of bounds of a movie or things like that, or break, you know, like we said earlier, break things in that way. So to intentionally talk about that is part of the deal.
Yeah, exactly. And I even feel like with my game, I was talking about it with like a friend today, and she's very scared. Like she has a phobia of space. Like if she looks at the sky and she imagines it as a blanket, she's fine with it. But if she imagines it at like at what it is, like an infinite thing that goes on forever, kind of, she finds that really terrifying. And it's interesting because that's how I often think about at least when I was growing up, I was so scared of no clipping out of games. Like you fall through the level, it's kind of scary because this what feels like an enclosed space is actually an infinite nothing, just outside of it, and just kind of the fear of like finding something in them. Especially like how Source games used to have like a little extra room outside of the level where they put like entities to make like the level work or something. And I remember playing like Gary's Mod or something, and like clip and you find these rooms, and obviously they don't have a function or something, but it's just weird that it's like outside of this game space, there's still something there, and it's terrifying. And I think with my game, this is like what I'm making a horror game about, like the unintentional scariness of just the medium itself, like no clipping out of a space, like having to be alone in a multiplayer game because you're waiting for people to join and stuff. There's so much like, you know, especially as someone that grew up with games, so much phobia around just like the limitations of the medium or something. And I think it's so cool to like make stuff about that because this is like was so unique to just games,
Absolutely. I mean, I think there is a big tendency with games about games. In your game, it very vague, but in UFO 50 and in our RPG as well, with like putting bodies in the walls of these games that you kind of explore and exploit and eventually figure out how to get outside of the bounds of what they're originally intending and discover these secrets. I think that feels very inherently gamey, while at the same time totally breaking the rules of what's normally expected from video games.
Yeah, exactly. It reminds me even of like the part in the beginner's guide where it's like the game is just like a room, but then it's revealed that if you kind of edit it, there's like so much more outside of the game space. That's kind of like a perfect example of like, doing a commentary on just like the games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what we're all doing here because they've already made the best game about games with the beginner's guide, but we'll keep trying.
So. I think so.
Well, kind of touching on that aspect of like using games as a medium with the glitches and getting out of bounds and hiding things in the walls to almost elicit this feeling of horror. I mean, very explicitly elicit this feeling of horror in No Player Is Online. I'm wondering, all three of these games touch in one way or the other on the surreal, on the haunted, on games that are existing in a way that isn't just the normal that you would expect from a video game you might purchase on the shelf. Not just because they're about other games, but also because they seem to be hiding secrets or involving themselves in some sort of magical element. And I'm wondering why this was something that seems to be so prevalent in games about games, and specifically why the two of you might have integrated that into your games as an element for the design of the finished versions.
Could you rephrase that question slightly? So basically, your question is, why do we use other games to...
Oh, sorry, that might have been unclear.
No, I think I just zoned out or something.
Yeah. To rephrase the question, touching on the elements of like horror made out of games and the errors in them, all three of these games have very surreal, magical elements to them, whether they have a grounded or a haunted explanation. And I'm wondering what the reason for incorporating these elements might be into these games, especially that happen to be about other games.
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit before when we chatted separately, but I feel like there's an inherent magic in games, and the medium is magical. We're writing spells, lines of code into a window, and then a machine inscribed with rocks that have a certain pattern to make an image appear on the screen is like already inherently magical. So the magic is just integrated into games, both like literally and figuratively. That's the most common way of interacting with combat in games is magic, besides guns or magical guns a lot of times. So yeah, I feel like it's natural to think about the more metaphysical, esoteric things, like especially in Adam's game with having literal like empty vessel. I also have like a empty vessel soul thing in my game too. So it's just kind of an interesting natural link, I think.
Mm. Yeah, for me, it's also like mostly just about the fact that I find it really interesting to think of like an like a games as like, oh, it's just like a window into a thing that exists or something, instead of like it being something that you make completely and stuff, and then all of the parts are there and stuff. It's more like you're just decoding some kind of a mystical object or something, and like making that visible on a screen or something. And I think because this is, I think, how a lot of people, especially when you don't understand how game development works, or if you're like, especially if you're like a kid, you just imagine everything that is in the game to actually be like that thing, that background texture is a place that you can go and stuff. And so in my game, the whole concept is like you combine the games together at a certain point and you introduce like kind of different souls into the game. And just because these games are actually like real things, they react to being disturbed, and they like the characters in the game are like, might like react to the fact that suddenly there's another soul there as well, and they enter a different game and they only know like for example, there's like a dating visual novel game, and when you put it into like the main shooter game, it just makes it so that not only is there like the dialogue box from the dating sim, but also like the dialogue box, like the soul of the dating sim is the only one that can communicate because it's the only one that has been given like words, and then it's reacting to the fact that it's in a different game, and it's at a certain point it says to the player like, oh, there's like other people here, and like there's this one guy who's really messy or something, and like it's just like the games are like souls and they're like interacting with each other, and I think that's like super cool to like play with, or like to even think about like games.
Yeah, and it is interesting to think about games as these things that live on in your imagination, just because experientially they're so different from other mediums. Like I think about Dark Souls a lot because of just kind of the spatial like map that you start to build in your head, and you really start to remember where all the turns are and where everything is. And I'm not very good with directions in real life, but for some reason that I know my way around that place, So it's like these games can have a different relationship with our memory and just with our own experiences. It's like you experienced a dream,
Yeah. True. It's actually a good point about the Dark Souls, because like I feel like in real life I've gotten better at like navigating myself ever since I stopped like trying to use like Google Maps or anything and just trying to like memorize things as if it was the Dark Souls map. And then suddenly like it works, but like you are kind of forced in the real world, you are forced to make your own decisions on what your limits of interactability are. Whereas like in a game, this is like given on you. I always think of this one example where it's like if you have like a game with like a nice forest or something, you will probably, and that's the only thing that's there, you will probably approach it by like walking through it slowly, looking at the things or something and looking for something to do. But if it's the exact same game and at the top there's like a counter that says 0 out of 30 mushrooms collected, you will not stop at any point. You will just like race and try and find the mushrooms and then move on. And I think it's cool that games it's not just presenting you with reality, but it's also like giving a context for you. So you're like, it's even like rebellious to fight against the context that was given you. But something that I think a lot of people really like try to do, like when I play GTA, I turn off all the radars and all the maps and stuff like that, and just try to, kind of making my life difficult or something. But then it's fun because suddenly it becomes a game about just like walking around and looking at streets, you know.
I think that that idea of like the context of how you experience a world and the metrics it gives you is just as important as what's actually in that. Is like the 100% the core of what I've been trying to do with RP Goat. The entire idea is if you present the last hour of a game you haven't played, it suddenly becomes a puzzle game because you need to figure out how to get to the end of it without having played all the context. And I think it's like the idea of like games are so systems heavy. They're so programmatic. You make so many individual things and put them all together, and then they kind of cascade downwards. The idea of these squishy interactions that come not from like I programmed a specific thing, but just human psychology of if I put a number on the screen, it will change how you interact with this, not change how the game actually functions, is a really interesting thing that you can mess with more strongly in a game where you're kind of bringing to the forefront those UI elements and the elements of gaminess that you wouldn't otherwise have.
Yeah. I think also like this kind of goes back to like the first question that you asked, like why are we suddenly making games about games, is I think because if games came off of play, just like games you would play in real life and stuff like that, real life has all of this other stuff going on already. So playing a game is restricting real life into a set of rules. And so games got sprung off on that. It was like, oh, we'll do like a set of rules on like a scale or something. But now we've gotten like technologically so far, and also like culturally so far with games as a medium, that like it's no longer, we realize that there is more space for exploration within the medium than just the rules, because now we're doing the opposite, where it's like, hey, instead of like taking real life and limiting into a set of rules, it's like, hey, let's take this digital world and like remove all of the rules and let's see how that like recontextualizes it or something. It's like a reversal almost, like this,
All right. Well, I want to build on something that was said a while back, but Adam, you mentioned about the idea that when you're a kid, especially, you look at a game and you see the skybox in the distance, and you assume like that's a place that actually exists. You don't see, oh, there was an artist who made a PNG that's circling the game world. And I think that's really interesting, the idea of implying more space and more game than there actually is. For another game about games, I talk to people a lot about Daniel Mullen's Inscription as a game that's really cool if you don't know how games are made, and wildly impressive if you do know how games are made, because you rule out space in your mind that like, well, he can't spend more time making this game, he had to have a development cycle. And one thing that I think one thing that I think appears in all three of these games is I've resorted to calling it on the RPG team like narrative force perspective, like force perspective being using the fixed position of where the person looking at something is going to be to imply a different like spatial relation than would otherwise be the case. I think the most famous one is oftentimes buildings will have smaller windows closer together the higher they get up, so that it looks like the building is taller than it actually is. And then like in narrative, that would be, especially in these games, the moments where you imply there's more game than there actually is. In RPG, it's that we have, you get 35 achievements when you open the game that are all about the game that you haven't played. We have a percentage counter on the main menu that has a 99% complete save file. I think, Joe, it happens in your game as well. I don't know if you want to talk about the Dwayne Boy color.
Yeah. So there is basically a parody of modern systems with the Dwayne Boy color that's played by the main character, but you, the player, are experiencing the interface of the boot up of it, and you're able to click on different cover arts with the games there. And if you try to play the game, it says like, oh, you need to insert the cartridge So you can't actually play them
Oh.
like in Adam's game.
When I played it, Joe, I was like, oh, I have all these games, and I really genuinely thought all of them would be playable. And I just was like, okay, I'll start with this one because this is the most logical to start with because it's the title of the game. And so I went to do that one, and it's the perfect experience because I thought when I finished the demo, like, oh, I really want to check out the other games. I was completely convinced.
I wish I had more time to develop because even just having one of them playable would be awesome. But yeah, that's just like you said, suggesting game culture within the world of that game and like what kind of games are there. And we see this technique a lot with like world building and stuff. Maybe like an example would be Han Solo saying he did the Kessel Run however fast, and then you're thinking about his past, which makes it so much less interesting when they do the prequel movie and it's like, I'm gonna do the Kessel Run now. It's like it demystifies it, and it's like, oh, okay, so I don't know. I feel like that's a big problem with a lot of prequel movies now is revealing the interesting world building that you got to fill in with your imagination. Like,
That's so true.
yeah, we don't actually care how the witch got her hat from Wizard of Oz or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. True. It's always how I think about how, like, in Portal 2, they play so well with the lighting to make all of these spaces look super big, but when you see, like, the levels with the lighting off, they're obviously super small because the engine cannot make really big spaces. But just by doing, like, fog in the right places and, like, the lighting kind of fades off or something, it makes it seem all so impossibly big. But it's actually interesting because I feel like with my game, I'm kind of doing, like, the opposite. Like, there's almost not a single part of my game that's like left open-ended or something. Like all of the things on the on the browser are injectable. All of the games that can be downloaded. Um, and there is some stuff because obviously I have limitations, and I do, like, for example, there's a part in the editor. There's like an editor or something, and I fake that it's like because it's crashed, it's like a save mode, so half of the buttons are like disabled or something to limit myself. But I think structurally, when I started making the game, I made a lot of these systems and stuff, and a lot of these interactions, and I set all of them kind of up. And now I'm just trying to basically, as I'm trying to finish the game, kind of trying to make sure that every single open end that I had in the game leads to something somehow, or at least it has an interaction when I click on it. Because I think it's so satisfying to try and make a game that's fully responsive, that really responds to all of the input that you give in and all of the input that you can. And I think this is honestly what makes Nintendo games so good, because all of the buttons that don't do anything make a little buzzer sound, like boom, doesn't do anything. So it's like a game feel thing, almost. But it is, at the end of the day, it is impossible to make everything. But it is kind of interesting to try and resist yourself from putting anything in the game that's not there. Yeah.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. For no players online, every button on the keyboard will do something.
It actually does, because every single button on the keyboard makes a keyboard sound.
Yeah,
Like-
I noticed that.
So good.
I noticed that in the typing part.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay, well, I want to piggyback off what you just said there. You mentioned this moment in your game where there's going to be a game editor, and then like there's going to be it's in recovery mode, so you can't access a lot of the tools. And I think that's something that all three of these games play with as well, but especially yours and I's games, Adam. The fact that there is a very clear understanding of the rules of games, and that if you want to create these things that exist kind of within the walls and in weird spaces of games, you have to end up messing with those or manipulating them in ways that would not otherwise be required if you were making something that's about a real life experience. In RPG, for example, I can't have a tutorial because it's the end of the game, and it would be weird for them to tutorialize anything at that point. So it's ended up with having to manipulate the save file you start with so that you get booted into a boss fight and then you die and they didn't save, so you end up going back further, and it is all around trying to introduce things slowly when you can't actually introduce things slowly by the nature of the premise of the game. And I'm wondering if there are any interesting examples anyone has or insights into this kind of playing with the structure of games within these other games in order to create results that might not be what the initial grammar of these games was intended to convey.
I think one thing I do want to say is, like, when I was playing your game, Joe, when I was doing the whole RPG thing, I was really, like, as I was doing it, I was like, wait, I'm gonna have to play a whole RPG game now? Because I really believed it, like, because you make sure that a lot of those trailing ends, like, every single character does seem to say something that has a point or something, and you have, like, pickups and stuff, and so you really, like, convincingly fooled me into thinking, like, oh shit, for the next, like, hour I'm gonna be playing this game. And then I was like, and just as I was like, oh, I hope that the RPG part ends soon, it just ended, and I was like, oh, let's go. And, like, you know, and, like, it's kind of it's so cool when it's like you subvert it in such a way that it's like it's almost like you're reading the player's mind or something. And it's even interesting, I think, to play with the fact that that you are aware of the fact that maybe a player will not want to play a whole RPG game.
Yeah.
And then actually making that into a joke or something, like knowing that maybe the player doesn't want to play a game, and then you kind of let them know that you know that. Yeah.
Yeah. And a funny thing about that is that sequence ends with the Dwayne boy dying, and that's foreshadowed on the UI screen. You can kind of see a blinking low battery sign when you select the game, which is like a reference to my PSP that would always die. It had like a blinking little battery icon. So I saw so many people get fooled by that, by the game dying there, and they'll like turn to me while playing the demo, like, your game broke. And then they turn back, they're like, okay, you got me. So, like, even playing with the idea of the game itself breaking is interesting, and we saw a little bit of that with, like, mouth-washing, kind of toying with some of the glitchy elements of something like a indie game or something like that. But yeah, that's interesting to hear, Adam. And also, yeah, same thing where it's like, if someone doesn't like the RPG section, it's like, I didn't make that. That's some other people in the game made that.
This is all just an excuse. This is
Yeah.
All right, well, I actually want to touch on something you mentioned very briefly there, Joe, which is the inspiration for it being your PSP that used to die all the time. And I think there's a weird thing about games. When we're putting the developers into the context of the narrative. Like, just pause here a second. Like, obviously, all those developers really did make those games, but we all made these games. They're not really made by these fictional developers or these other people out there. And it kind of inherently puts you as a developer into conversation with the game even more strongly than would otherwise be the case from just a game that you put your heart and soul and effort into. And I'm wondering, because I have a lot of thoughts on this for RPG. It's very autobiographical, but I think there's a different extent of how much the three of us are incorporated into the games versus not, and how you all draw the line, and how much you kind of interface between your real-life experiences of making the game, or even outside of that, and the final results of the games that you're creating.
Yeah, so, like, in the very beginning of my game, there are some, like, very specific memories that a character's experiencing when they're dying and their life is flashing before their eyes with a series of different memories, and like all of those are my memories. So like I put myself into my game very directly, but also zooming out in the more meta sense, with Mush, later on in the story, it's revealed that they're a struggling writer, and I at one point wanted to be a games writer and was an intern at Game Informer. So like there is stuff in the game that is not only referencing games but also the culture around games, which your game has too, Adam. But you know, things like writing about media and thinking about things like that. I hope that answered your question, but yeah.
I didn't know you had done work at Game Informer. I would have talked earlier about the fact that the RPG has a fake Game Informer article as a plot
Oh,
point.
really? Oh, yeah. It's just sad what happened to Game Informer, and honestly, games writing in general. It's like you know, maybe I jumped from the frying pan into the fire, going from games writing to games with the state of the industry right now. But so far, everything's been okay.
If the first part of the job title has the word games, you're not doing well right
Yeah,
now.
just be careful.
So I
Adam, I'd
think
be
it's
curious
also
to hear. Oh yeah, go.
I think it's also interesting how like you know, actually I think when you're making a game or something, like actually you're being dishonest about the work that you're doing because you're trying to make this product or something, which is supposed to have as little to do as possible with the process of you making it. And so if you incorporate you making it into the story, then that kind of reverses that a little bit. And I think it also makes it like a better game because it is more honest. Like I do feel like a little bit, maybe even unintentionally, because I'm making my game in a very chronological way. I'm making the beginning of the game first and then the end of it later,
Same.
which is perfect because, I mean, the games that are revealed throughout the game end up being games that the developer in the game makes later as well. So as I improve my skill, the character in the game also improves their skill, but over the time within the game. And that actually makes it a better game. It makes it more realistic because I don't have to fake a worse skill before it. It just is real. It's just like God became a better developer as I made the game. And I think, like, you know, to answer your original question, like for me, it's always like I believe so much that whatever art you make or something, all of that stuff gets in there automatically. That it's good to not like force it or something. And that it's like for me, I just like I know that when I make random decisions, like, oh, this character is doing this or like had that history or something like that, I know that there's a reason why I thought of these things. And as long as I feel like it's coming from somewhere deep enough, like I'm not just trying to imitate another game, I'm being like, okay, I'm doing this because, I don't know, for some reason I guess this interests me or something. I always notice that later when I reflect on it, it's like, oh, I obviously did that because of this and this in my life. All of the things that you put in there come from somewhere that is very like personal to you, and so it will like happen automatically. And I like to like just like trust that process a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you're able to decode messages from yourself that you didn't even understand until later. That's like one of the most powerful things about art in general. But yeah, that was just my thought on that.
Yeah.
If you have the context of being the developer, the early parts of the game almost become this like log book of what was your game prior, what was your skill level prior as you go through, even though you don't need to intentionally create it. It's
Yeah,
interesting.
exactly.
I feel like we talked, or we didn't talk a little bit about this yet in this. We talked about this before. The kind of development timelines of these three games. With Joe, you've been working on your game for a heck of a long time,
Yeah.
and Adam, you were being a great advocate for making games faster and shorter. This is kind of a more grounded just in games in general, but I'm interested to see what all of you think about the kind of development timelines of your games and how that kind of interfaces with how you've been making them.
It's a great question. I mean, I I understand the dread of stuck in this project for this long, but it's almost like a religious devotion for me or something like that, where I just like am doing this almost daily practice of building this insane huge castle. I actually recently saw something on Instagram Reels, which was insane. It was like, I don't know what year it was, but it was like maybe around the 1800s. Some post office worker had a dream, and it was a vision of this castle. And he decided to build it like himself, like rock by rock, over like 33 years. And he built this insane, beautiful castle and basically had a plaque on it, said like, this took this many hours over 33 years. I would like to see you try to do better. I almost like feel like that's kind of what I'm doing. Like I had this vision for this game all the way back in 2017, and I've been working on it slowly but surely, and it's slowly but surely terraforming my entire life around it. So it's my relationship with my game is very, very bizarre in that way. And I hope this isn't an ego protective thing that I'm doing, but I truly feel like I have already succeeded just by the fact that I can make it, you know? Like I don't I want the game to do well, obviously financially, but I don't actually care, because the fact that I got to make it and make it my way, like that's my castle that I've been building towards.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because for me it's also like a little bit like I also want the game to do well, but look, for me, I'm looking forward to being done with this game, that when it's done, I'll be happy because it's done. It's like if it makes money, that would be sick, but like to be honest, I've never really like made a game with being like, oh, I really want this to make money, because for me it's just like I just want to make the thing and be done with it and move on.
Yeah.
And I really have like a really like a strong feeling of, for me, it's like when I make the game, it's not so much for me about the process as much. I feel like I don't really enjoy the process to the extent of like the cycle of it, like the finding the zen in the process or something. I feel like every time I'm working on a game, every single part I'm doing is like, oh, I want this to be over with as fast as possible. This model needs to be done now. This part needs to be done now. It's like I really don't care about like the process, and I find it sometimes difficult to actually pause and like relish in the process, because it's good to like take your time. But I've always, and I think this is because I used to make like a game every month for like ages. And so I got really used to maybe the dopamine rush of finishing the thing. And for me, that's actually like what it's about. Like I finish the game and then I see someone play it online, and it's like, oh, I've expressed this thing, and I see them expressing it, and it's like, oh, the communication is completed. And that's what I'm actually getting out of it for me. And I've recognized that over time with all of the games that I've made. And that's why I'm having so much trouble with this game, because I've set myself this super long development time for many factors, financially and just like stability and stuff like that. But it's like, now I'm like, oh, I will never do a game this long again, because the whole point I'm making the game is to get it out.
Yeah.
And if I take so long to get it out, I'm just like hurting myself for no reason. Like, yeah.
That reminds me of Xalavier from Strange Scaffold, said the same exact thing, which is, I'm addicted to the process of releasing games, the whole entire thing. And yeah, maybe I could have gotten addicted to that if I wasn't working on this one really long game. But it is interesting to think about, you know, I have no control over the outcome of the game being out there in the world or having any accolades whatsoever. Like, the only thing I can do is just make it. Like, you know what I'm saying? And like anything else
Yeah,
is a bonus, essentially.
true. I also think genuinely, like, if we were that predisposed with the financial success of our game, we probably wouldn't be making the games we are.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
This would be a panel of 3 roguelike deck builders, or perhaps multiplayer shooters.
Yeah, exactly.
The,
Exactly.
No, I mean, for myself, like, I got into in 2022 going to when I get into university the physical game jam space that where you would go make a game over 48 hours and then you'd present it like on a projector to the people around you who you'd been making things next to the entire weekend, and I instantly started making way weirder, way funnier games because I'm like, that's all I care about now. I care about when they project that game on the screen that everyone in this room laughs. And I think that resulted in RPG kind of being a meditation on what it's like about who games end up being for. Are they for the people who are making them? Are they for the people in that room with that projector? Are they for the people who buy them on Steam? And trying to figure out how you interface with that, especially when you're making something for like a year, 2 years, 7 years. It can be hard to decide. Like, ultimately, at the end of the day, who is this supposed to be for?
yeah, exactly. I think also like it's a really good point. I think thinking back on the beginner's guide, I think the beginner's guide is so much about this. Is like the beginner's guide is an absolute fascination with the most romantic concept possible. Someone that makes the games just for themselves, because like I think it's almost like impossible to imagine any artist in the world that's totally fine with making a beautiful thing and then deleting it and never ever telling anyone about it. Like that's just like almost a sick fantasy. I think that this is something someone could aspire to be. And maybe this like, and I mean this is like the point of the beginner's guide, like him dealing with the fact that he can't have that and he needs the validation, he needs the showing the game on the projector and stuff, and him feeling almost like sick about it or something. But it's so true, like end of the day, like the artist just, I don't know, whether you make art is for so many different reasons for so many different people, but it's almost never just like just for the thing itself. It does remind me a little bit of when I started making games. There was this one game that I was working on, like I think it was the second thing I ever started making, and I overscoped it like way too hard, and I got so frustrated with the fact that I was trying to make something I couldn't, that I got like really emotional one night, and I just wrote down like just like a vent or something in like the dialogue, and then made it so like the first thing you interact with was just like this long vent, and then I would play it as like a cathartic thing, and then I deleted it, and that's the only time I've ever made a game and like deleted it and removed it from existence. And I actually hate that because I still think about it like, wow, I really want to know what I said. Like I don't remember. It's like, yeah.
Yeah. There are Buddhist monks who make like these beautiful mandalas out of sand, and then once they're done, they just whoosh, whoosh, sweep the sand back into their bag. And I think that's a powerful metaphor for art making, because no matter what, your sand is getting swept away, boy. It's not gonna be there forever.
That's also true. Yeah.
That we talked about earlier, the arcane ritual of game making. Unfortunately, the spell can only last for so long.
Yeah, and yeah, that ties into other things about game preservation and stuff. It's wild how much we've seen stuff disappear just in our lifetime. Yeah, that's a whole different panel, though.
All right, we're starting to come to the end of our time here. So if anyone has any closing thoughts they'd like to share, we are about to run out of our space.
Closing thoughts.
Well, I have closing thoughts for the two, which is to say, the two of these other panelists here are making some of the coolest games I've ever seen. You should please buy them when they finally come out.
Thank you so much.
They don't care about them being successful, but I care about them being successful because I need them to make more things. So
thank you so much.
Sick.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Same to you, Lucas. I really love your game. I think your game is so powerful because it is the concept you know, you're running with the concept so much. It's so like, I loved when I booted up the game and it gave me 50 achievements, and I was like, I can't believe Valve let you do them. Like,
I'm really hoping they don't take it down for that. I'm gonna have to send some emails if they do.
Yeah, I had such a great conversation with you two both times, because this is our second time doing the panel. Both had really interesting things said during it, and yeah, I can't wait to talk with both of you more.
Absolutely, this has been phenomenal. I'm very thankful that we all got to get on here and chat and talk about some really, really weird games.
Yeah.
All right, well, if that's that, thank you all for coming on the panel. Thank you for talking, and have a good LudoNarraCon. I don't know if that's something you attend, but yeah, have a good one, everyone.
enjoy watching videos.